Thank you, and welcome to this afternoon's session. I'd like to remind everybody to turn their cell phones off in case they had to turn them on over the lunch break. Also have a couple of announcements to make, one being that the Ars Orientalis that was offered earlier on for sale is still available. We still have several copies available, so you should contact Nancy, Masume, or Zainab if you're interested. And I'd just like to mention that the format that we're going to have this afternoon for our talks is as we had in the morning, where our speakers will give their papers, and then after they've all completed their papers, they will be seated on the far side of the stage, where they will take questions as a group. Thank you so much. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, who is Mercedes Volait. She is giving a paper called Monument or Ornament, Early French Architectural Histories of Islamic Buildings in Egypt. And this is the first paper that will kick off the panel, which is titled Reconstructing Meaning Through Historiography and Museology. Mercedes Volait is research professor at the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art in Paris, France. Her current research focuses on architectural revivalism, antiquarianism, and reuse in 19th century Egypt. Her last book was called, can be translated as Crazy About Cairo, Architects, Eccentrics, and Art Lovers in Cairo from 1867 to 1914. Sounds like a must-read. And it was published in 2009. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome her today. Welcome, Mercedes.
Thank you for your kind presentation, and thank you also to the organizer for this very rich symposium. I'd like to start by saying just very quick words about the larger perspective of this paper. Mainly, I'm interested in the relationship between design, taste, and knowledge in the 19th century in connection with Cairo monuments, an architectural legacy that attracted much European attention at the time, as you all well know. And it's important to mention design because it's in fact through design that I came to the issue I'm going to talk today, through an interest in architectural Orientalism in Cairo, and that led me to study collecting practices and antiquarian work. Indeed, discovering along the way, maybe very naive, but that is it, that the worlds of designing buildings, collecting objects, drawing monuments, selling antiques, or commissioning art were not necessarily separate spheres, but ones with many entanglements. So in a way, this talk is a sort of transition between what we heard this morning and what we are going to get to this afternoon, and I'm going to try to make this work. Good examples of these overlappings are provided by the work of architect Jules Bourgoin. I'm aware you don't pronounce it like that here, but Jules Bourgoin, a man who produced thousands of drawings of monuments in Cairo, Damascus, and Jerusalem in the mid-1860s, thanks to an assignment to supervise the rebuilding of the French consulate in Alexandria, and that was the early 1860s. Bourgoin was to participate in other architectural endeavors as well, from the Saint-Maurice house up left. For those of you who have been seeing the Mamluk porch in the Louvre galleries, this is where, oh, well, no, I don't know how to make this, but that porch was supposed to be there before, in fact, being shipped to Paris. Bourgoin also participated in the Cairo Street at Paris 89 World Fair because of his antiquarian skills, and finally he also contributed as well to the enlargement of Islamic art collections in France by buying ceramics, so we're into tiles again, from Damascus for the Musée de la Céramique de Sèvres, and we have a few examples. We have a few examples here, and this one from Damascus also in for that building. Similarly, Another French connoisseur, Émile Prisdaven, was not only the scholar that we know today, but an engineer by training, a teacher by profession during his early years in Egypt in the 1830s, an amateur archaeologist, a collector himself, and in a few instances, even an acting designer. These are the two men on which I like to concentrate here, and we can see them in the following slides at work. So here is Prisdaven designing, making squeezes. He was very good at it. And this is Bourgoin with his Egyptian crowd. And my aim here is to underline first that despite their generational difference, the works of these two connoisseurs of Cairene architecture run somehow in parallel, and more strikingly, were being released almost at the same time by the same publisher. Second, that they were produced within very distinct approaches to Islamic architecture, as I will try to show. And finally, that both, however, came to include objects in their inquiries, despite a departure point in architecture. So, overlappings or entanglements, parallel publications. Les Arts Arabes and L'Art Arabe were produced from the late, during almost all the 1870s by the same publisher, Veuve Morel, the first in 14 installments until 1873, and the second between 1869 and 1877. The economic model of such a strategy is not easy to understand today, but the fact is that they were published simultaneously. Priest's publication, the one, so here, is a much more substantial one than the Bourgoin album. It results from a lifetime study of monumental architecture in Egypt that started with tombs and temples of ancient Egypt all the way down to Mamluk and Ottoman religious and domestic architecture. And it is indeed deeply embedded in Priest's ethnographical interests. His first published work was a series of scenes and types from the Nile Valley, the Oriental Album, that was published in London in 1848. The idea to produce a suite de monuments arabes datés, a collection of Arab monuments with dates, is explicitly mentioned by Priest in a report to the French government in 1858 while he was accomplishing a scientific mission in Cairo subsidized by the French government. Dates were of crucial interest to Priest, and he had learned how to read them on Ottoman building, as this folio from his papers suggests. By 1865, the intended work had become Études sur l'art arabe en Egypte, and the plan was to release it at the Paris World Fair of 1867 because he thought he would have a nice public there. The enterprise proved much more difficult than anticipated. It involved many people. Priest had a total of 60 engravers working for him over the 20 years of production of his book. Part of the material needed copyright negotiation, and in the end, material for another book was squeezed in, and I'll come back to this later on. And for example, a mosque lamp that he had seen at the exhibition in 1867, or a tray and its stand from a private collection. And this is weird with the title of the book, since the book was supposed to be called L'Art Arabe d'après les monuments and not d'après les objets. Tensions with his first publisher escalated until the selling of the manuscript to Morel in 1869 for a very substantial amount. The last parts of L'Art Arabe were finally released just a couple of years before Priest's death in 1879. Bourgoin, Les Arts Arabes is a completely different story. In his case, the book opens, rather than closes, a long series of publication devoted to the analysis of ornament, be it Islamic or otherwise. It is a lighter publication, 28, oh, no, that's, oh, no, sorry, excuse me. So I go back here. It is a lighter publication, 20-page text, 92 illustrations, and it was heavily subsidized thanks to the support of the famous French architect and theoretician Viollet-le-Duc, while Priest's work was an entirely private business that ruined him in the end. Priest d'Aven was drawn to Islamic architecture by ethnography and archaeology. He labeled himself an artist and an antiquarian and viewed monuments as documents, to the extent of taking in 1844 to France a whole chamber with names of ancient Egypt rulers, not his wisest or most respectable move. One of Priest's earliest and shortest publications on Islamic monuments bearing his signature appeared in the Revue Générale de l'Architecture in 1856. It is dedicated to the reuse of ancient capitals in mosques in Cairo and Damiette. The article is a very brief piece highlighting that the topic of spolia in Islamic architecture deserves attention. The idea that series could offer a way to contribute to historical understanding is present in many of Priest's writings. At one point, he started gathering material on minaret finials. A posterior comment on a ceramic panel in the Mosque of Kous reads as follows. This decoration is remarkable mainly for its Kufic inscription of the Bismillah. We have chosen the sacred verse that opens every chapter in the Quran in order to be allowed to compare it to inscriptions of the same kind but that differ at each epoch. The analytical perspective, the idea of the indexicality of carefully selected elements for comparative analysis is here pushed further ahead. Priest's following contribution on Islamic architecture, most probably predating his second sojourn in Egypt in the 1850s, appeared in an architectural encyclopedia published by the French amateur archaeologist Jules Gaillabeau. The encyclopedia was published between 1850 and 1858 under the title L'architecture du 5e au XVIIe siècle et les arts qui en dépendent, la sculpture, la peinture murale, la peinture sur verre, etc. Priest has contributed to Gaillabeau's previous project, Monuments Anciens et Modernes, by writing and illustrating all entries on ancient Egyptian monuments. For the sequel project, focusing on medieval times, all drawings representing the Arab school bear Priest's signature, but the texts are supposedly authored solely by Jules Gaillabeau, according to him, quote unquote, based on the unpublished works of French and foreign architects of repute, according to the book subtitle. This second encyclopedia represents an early attempt to illustrate architecture through the buildings, but also through the minor arts related to it. The Arab school is illustrated by a mihrab in Damiette, stone screens from the Mosque of Sangar el Gauli in Cairo, and metal and stucco work from the Mosque of Kos and El Hanka. They provide a remarkable presence of Islamic monuments in a publication that is otherwise purely European, and I doubted that today we will have the same important presence of Islamic architecture in such a publication. I doubt that Jules Gaillabeau ever visited the Egyptian sites on which his text comments at length, but all are locations that Priest knew very well for having been posted both in Damiette and in El Hanka when working for the Egyptian administration in the 1830s, and we know also he had much interest in the Mosque of Kous. Whatever the case, and I'm making the case that Priest and Gaillabeau is the same voice, the text express views that well match Priest's working philosophy, or eventually even offer a synthesis of Gaillabeau and Priest's approach to monumental history. The entry on the pseudo-mihrab reads as follows. In such a study, it is crucial to discover through the elements and the character of the work of art its date, nature, and origin. The entry on the mihrab at Kous alludes to religious practice when dealing with religious architecture. We will not enter here into details related to the prayer and the preparation for it. This is for a subsequent work, unfortunately never so light. A much later plate engraved in the early 1850s but unpublished by Adalbert de Beaumont, we heard of Adalbert de Beaumont this morning, suggests that priests may have envisioned the possibility of using mihrabs as indexes to classify religious building. About the screens in the Sangar el Gauli Mosque, Gayabo text makes a plea for what would be termed as social and cultural history of art in current taxonomies. All archaeology should make active inquiries in order to fill the gaps in art history. They should indeed collect all possible evidence regarding another history, its inseparable sister, that no less important, of manners and customs. Priest himself has started a manuscript on manners and customs in Egypt that was left unfinished. A last statement in connection with bronze work in the Mosque of Kous and the Khanka concerns over-interpretation and could again be easily attributed to priests. We will not, for fear of making important mistakes, embark upon a study for which dates are missing or for which we would be conducted in matter of interpretation to pure speculation, which is, to us, the worst thing. The hope of further discoveries and research impose the greatest cautiousness and invite us to postpone the writing to a time when we will possess more numerous pieces of evidence. The rejection of over-interpretation may explain why some important observations made in Carini monuments by priests, thanks to a sharp eye, and I suspect conversation with other amateurs, did not land ultimately to comprehensive analysis. This is the case for the example of the extraordinary iconography that he identified on marble panels in the Mosque of Sargatmech, and which he survived other instances in domestic architecture. And I wish that Cynthia Robinson will be here to we're here to explain what hands bearing branches mean, or rather the little we know about it. Another example of a close look at monuments is the curious sculpted stone, probably a spolia in the Mosque of Sultan Hassan, an artifact that popular knowledge understands in Egypt as a reference to the dome of the rock, but which actual meaning and whereabouts is yet to be uncovered. Priest through his connection to Priest was connected to Gayabo, we know that, and he was also well acquainted with the work of Serrault d'Agincourt, the pioneer of monumental history. He had the prospectus of his Histoire de l'art par les monuments depuis sa décadence au IVe siècle jusqu'à son renouvellement au XVIe siècle, a work dated 1823. And so he was really Priest was well aware of developments in the field of history through monuments. Eventually, he begins speaking in 1869 of his 2 volumes on l'art égyptien and l'art arabe as belonging to a unique or a larger project in 2 parts that he labeled Égypte monumentale. According to specialists of this historiographical genre, illustrated monumental histories were mainly produced in France by cosmopolitan architecture draughtsmen well connected to Anglo-Saxon culture, but located at the periphery of the French system. By his alleged Welsh origin and his close friendship with British scholars, as well as by his marginal position in French academia, Priest fit this model quite well. His later work does also follow a larger trend in monumental history, that of enlarging the scope of inquiry to objects, as well as to issues related to iconography, and I will come back to this in the conclusion. Bourgoin can be defined, it's another story, can be defined briefly as belonging to what a colleague has termed as the scientific aesthetics of architecture, the science of architectural expression, a movement who drew many French architects from the 1860s either to positivist history or to pure science, mathematics, and linguistics, in particular, in the case of Bourgoin and others. His first publication, Les Arts Arabes, was meant to make the public the European public aware of geometrical ornamentation in the East, and to try to explain it in a context where most knowledge was based on Moorish examples, and we saw this morning the importance of Moorish examples. In the view of Bourgoin, Eastern art was a syncretic art where all Byzantine, Persian, Indian, Moorish elements intermingled within the Arab civilization. The publication was based on the idea of the entrelac, a decorative element that Bourgoin considered of Greek origin and that was, in his view, reconsidered, extended, and developed with infinite art by the Eastern people. Because his aim was to present an ornamental system, Bourgoin acknowledges that he had to sacrifice general views and isolate details to be able to artificially get examples close to each other and extract from the comparison the fundamental essence of such a decorative system. His next step was a theory of ornament, where he generalized his approach to Islamic geometric patterns by identifying methodically every possible way in which lines were combined. The text is accompanied by plates comparing motifs taken from different media and periods from ancient Egypt to European contemporary architecture. Motifs are reduced to abstracting lines, color is eliminated. Compositions were explored not only from decorative arts, but also from organic forms coming from the mineral and vegetal world. The conceptual approach to Islamic art was sophisticated in the following book, Les éléments de l'art arabe, where Bourgoin published analytical grids and their actual application to polychrome motifs, for which patterns collected in Damascus, this one, here, oh, well, I'm really not good with this. Collected in Damascus may have provided inspiration. Bourgoin then moved to the production of a grammar of ornament, quite distinct from that of his illustrious predecessor. And his thinking eventually developed in the invention of a new language and science of figure, which he proposed to label La Graphique. And the 3-volume book that he devoted to La Graphique was to be his last achievement. Pries and Bourgoin did not only share a publisher, they were familiar with each other's work. The younger drew plates for the elder, and they had in common questions and embarrassments about how to understand and label Islamic art. To echo recent debates on the topic, it is interesting to recall that Pries came towards the end of his life to consider that Islamic art was a much more appropriate term than Arab or Turkish art. It was a generic term under which subgenres existed according to geographical and ethnic variation, in his opinion. And interestingly enough, the example he brings in support of his theory is Renaissance, that is, could be termed Italian, French, or Flemish, according to national variation, but that still offers a general umbrella to the work of art of that period. More importantly, Pries' reflection moved from monumental history to iconology. His papers referred to a manual on Islamic archaeology that was to follow his L'Art Arabe, and where he had planned to include all that he had to say on, quote, the representation of human and animal beings, on heraldry, on textiles. The manuscript has not been located so far, but there are multiple mentions in his papers to the studies that he has started for that purpose, collecting any material that had figurative representation on it, such as textiles kept in a private collection. The project was entitled Les tissus et les broderies en Orient et Occident depuis l'Antiquité jusqu'au XVe siècle, classé par ordre chronologique avec texte explicatif précédé d'un essai sur l'histoire de l'industrie textile dans l'Antiquité. Short title. The perspective of Pries has thus evolved along the years from a purely monumental history of Egypt to an art history interested in objects and iconology, a discipline that Pries defined in 1863 as, quote, the history of the social condition and of the most advanced ideas of a given people. Bourgoin may have been much less sensitive to such issues. However, his papers do contain as well drawing of objects with heraldry and figural forms. In any case, a social history of art in one hand and the science of ornament in the other, both contributed to get their authors to move from architecture to objects and to get an ever closer look to material observed in Cairo building. Thank you very much for your attention.